During an heirloom audit, the black maid found a hidden clause, and the Mafia boss saw the betrayal he missed. Naomi Carter, the black maid, had always prided herself on her discretion. She had worked in the Romano mansion for 5 years, invisible to most of the household, blending into the background as she went about her work. But today was different. Today, she found something that would change everything. It was an old family contract, buried beneath piles of dusty papers in the corner of the study. As she dusted off the old wood, a strange feeling crawled up her spine. There was something about the document that didn't seem right. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned it over. The document was sealed with an ornate wax stamp. For a moment, Naomi considered leaving it alone, but curiosity got the better of her. She slowly broke the seal and opened the letter. The contents were full of legal jargon, but one clause stood out. It was a hidden clause, buried deep within the pages. It had been cleverly worded, so no one would notice, but Naomi's sharp eyes caught it. The clause was a trap, a financial loophole designed to take advantage of Dominic Romano's family estate. Naomi's heart raced. She knew the consequences of this clause being enacted. If it went unnoticed, the Romano family could lose everything. She quickly tucked the papers back into the folder, her mind racing. Naomi knew she couldn't let this go unnoticed, but what could she do? She was just a maid, and Dominic Romano was the Mafia boss, a man with power, wealth, and a reputation that made even the bravest of men tremble. She couldn't just march into his office and tell him what she had found, could she? But as she walked through the halls of the mansion, her mind kept returning to the hidden clause. This could ruin everything. She had to say something, but what would he do? Would he believe her? Naomi paused at the door to the study, her hand hovering over the handle. Her heart pounded in her chest. Finally, she took a deep breath and opened the door. Inside, Dominic Romano stood by the window, his back to her. The moment he heard her footsteps, he turned, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "What is it, Naomi?" His voice was calm, but Naomi could see the coldness in his eyes. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found something in the family documents, a hidden clause. It's a trap. If you don't act, it could destroy everything." Dominic's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Naomi feared he would dismiss her words. But instead, he walked over to the desk and motioned for her to sit. "Show me." Naomi hesitated for a moment before pulling the papers from her bag. She placed them on the desk, her hands trembling as she pointed to the clause. Dominic's expression shifted as he read the words. His eyes darkened with disbelief. Naomi held her breath, waiting for his reaction. Dominic's gaze lifted from the paper, and for the first time, Naomi saw something in his eyes that she had never expected: respect. "How did you find this?" he asked, his voice softer now. Naomi felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew it wasn't over yet. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "I just noticed it. It seemed out of place." Dominic's lips twisted into a wry smile. "You've just saved my family." "Thank you, Naomi." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had expected anger, maybe even dismissal, but not gratitude. She had never been seen like this before, especially by someone like Dominic Romano. The Mafia boss stood up, walking around the desk to face her. "You've done something no one else could. I owe you." Naomi didn't know how to respond. She had never been in a position like this, but in that moment, she realized that something had shifted between them. Something fundamental had changed. Naomi, once invisible in the mansion, had now earned Dominic's respect. And in that moment, she understood that this was just the beginning. Naomi stood there, still processing the gratitude Dominic had just expressed. She had never been in a situation like this before. Her entire life had been defined by being invisible. Just another face in the crowd, another maid who could be replaced without a second thought. But now, standing in the lavish study of Dominic Romano, she felt seen. Not as a servant, not as a maid, but as someone worthy of respect. Dominic walked around the desk, his powerful presence filling the room, and stopped right in front of her. For a moment, he simply looked at her, as if trying to understand the woman standing before him. Naomi's heart raced. She had spent years in his mansion, cleaning his halls, organizing his papers, and yet he had never truly looked at her. She had always been just a shadow, a figure in the background. Now, though, she could feel his gaze on her like never before. "You've done more than just save my family, Naomi," he said, his voice low and steady. You've saved me from something I didn't even see coming. I owe you more than words can express. Naomi felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't used to hearing such things. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she simply nodded, unsure if her words would do justice to the weight of the moment. Dominic studied her for a moment longer before speaking again. I think it's time we have a real conversation, he said, his voice carrying a certain authority that made Naomi's heart skip a beat. Come, sit with me. He gestured to a chair near the large window, where the sunlight poured in, casting a warm glow over the room. Naomi hesitated for just a second, then walked over and sat down. As she did, she couldn't help but feel a sense of nervous excitement. The air between them felt different now. There was an unspoken understanding that hadn't been there before. For the first time in her life, Naomi felt like she was on the same level as him, not just some nameless servant. Dominic sat across from her, his expression unreadable. He studied her carefully, as if weighing his next words. I'm sure you have many questions, he said finally, his tone softer than usual. Why I'm so interested in what you found. Why I'm thanking you. Naomi nodded. She had been wondering that very thing. Why was he thanking her? She had simply done what anyone would have done in her position. It wasn't like she had saved his life or anything dramatic like that. But for some reason, Dominic seemed to believe that her actions were more significant than she had imagined. I've spent years running this family business, he continued, his voice tinged with something Naomi couldn't quite place. I've built an empire from the ground up, but I've also let my guard down in certain places. I've trusted people I shouldn't have. This clause you found, it could have destroyed everything. I didn't see it. No one else did. But you did. Naomi swallowed hard. She wasn't used to hearing someone like Dominic speak so openly. She had always seen him as a figure of power, distant and untouchable. But now, as he spoke to her, there was a vulnerability in his voice that surprised her. He wasn't just the Mafia boss. He was a man who had made mistakes and was seeking redemption. I'm not used to trusting people, he said, looking down at the papers on the desk, as if they held the answers to some long unanswered question. I've had people betray me before. I've seen what happens when you let your guard down. But with you, he looked back at her, his gaze intense. You've shown me something I haven't seen in a long time. Loyalty. Integrity. Those things matter to me. Naomi was taken aback by his words. Loyalty? Integrity? She had always thought of herself as just a maid, someone who did her job quietly and went unnoticed. But Dominic was looking at her as if she were something more, something valuable. You've earned my respect, Naomi, Dominic continued, his voice steady. And I don't give that easily. Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been told she was worth little more than her cleaning skills, that her value was determined by her ability to stay invisible. But now, for the first time, someone was telling her that she mattered for who she was, not just what she did. Dominic stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the estate. The sunlight bathed him in a soft glow, making him appear almost human in a way that Naomi had never seen before. I don't know what the future holds, he said quietly, his back turned to her. But I do know this. You've earned a place in it. I won't forget what you've done. Naomi's heart swelled in her chest. She had spent so many years hiding in the shadows, never daring to imagine that she could be more than just a maid. But now, Dominic had given her something she hadn't even known she was missing, a sense of purpose, of worth. She was no longer just the woman who cleaned his mansion. She was someone who had the power to make a difference. As Dominic turned back to her, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that Naomi couldn't quite decipher. But it didn't matter. In that moment, she knew that this was just the beginning. She had taken the first step into a world that was no longer beyond her reach. Naomi had no idea what to expect after Dominic's words. She had never been in this position before. She had worked in his mansion for years, but always from the shadows. She had never been acknowledged like this, and now, it felt as if everything was shifting. She felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and something else that she couldn't quite name. Dominic's words still echoed in her mind. You've earned my respect. Naomi stood up from the chair, her legs slightly unsteady. She glanced at Dominic, who was now walking towards the large windows, his gaze fixed on the sprawling estate outside. The soft golden light of the afternoon filled the room, casting long shadows over the polished floors. It was strange. She had been in this very room countless times before, but now it felt different. Now, she was not just a maid in the background. Now, she was a part of something bigger. Naomi. Dominic's voice broke her thoughts, and she turned to face him. He was standing near the window, his posture relaxed, but there was something intense in the way he looked at her. "I'm going to need your help," he said, his voice steady and calm. Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. Help? She had never imagined that she would be asked to do anything more than her usual duties. "Of course, sir," she replied, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Dominic turned to face her, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "I've been running the Romano Empire for years, and it's been successful, but I can't do this alone anymore. I need people I can trust, Naomi. I need someone who can see things others can't, someone with sharp eyes. I think that person is you." Naomi blinked, stunned. Her? She had never imagined herself as someone who could help run the Romano Empire. But in that moment, something in Dominic's words clicked. She had always prided herself on being observant, on noticing the little things that others missed. Maybe this was the moment when her quiet work in the background could finally make a difference. Dominic stepped closer, his presence powerful in the small room. "I want you to be more than just a maid. I need you to work with me. Help me find what's hidden in the details, the things others overlook. Your attention to detail, your ability to spot things no one else does. That's what I need." Naomi's heart raced. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't a simple request. This was an opportunity. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for such responsibility. She had spent so long in the background, never daring to imagine that she could be more than what she was. Now, it seemed that Dominic was offering her a chance to step into a world she had only ever observed from afar. I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Naomi said, her voice uncertain. "I've never done anything like this before." Dominic smiled, the expression warm but still commanding. "You've already done more than most people would have. You found the clause. You've shown me you have the ability to think outside the box. That's all I need from you. Trust and your sharp mind." Naomi swallowed hard, her mind racing. This was a huge decision. She could continue living in the shadows, doing her job, staying invisible, or she could take a leap of faith and step into the light. Dominic, noticing her hesitation, walked closer, his voice softening. "Naomi, I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to take what you're already good at and apply it where it matters most. You're more than just a maid to me. I want you to be my ally." His words hit her like a wave. Ally. She had never thought of herself as an ally to someone like Dominic. But in that moment, she realized something. He was offering her a chance to be a part of something bigger than herself. He was offering her a place in a world she had never dared to imagine. She took a deep breath, her nerves still fluttering in her chest, but something in her had shifted. This was her chance to prove that she was more than just a maid, more than just someone who cleaned a mansion. She could be an active part of this empire. "I'll help you, Dominic," Naomi said, her voice steady now. "I don't know exactly what this will look like, but I'll do my best." Dominic's expression softened, a look of genuine appreciation crossing his face. "That's all I need. Together, we'll make sure the Romano legacy stays intact." Naomi nodded, feeling a sense of determination settle in her chest. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time in her life, she was excited about the unknown. She was ready to face whatever challenges came her way, knowing that Dominic had given her a chance to prove herself. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible anymore. Naomi sat at the small desk in the study, the weight of her decision pressing on her shoulders. She had agreed to help Dominic, to step into the world of power and influence that she had only ever observed from the outside. But now that the moment had come, she wasn't entirely sure what she had gotten herself into. The mansion was quiet today, the usual hum of activity absent, and in the stillness, Naomi felt the gravity of her new role. She had always been good at noticing the smallest details, a skill honed over years of silently observing the world around her. But this was different. Now, those same skills would be tested in ways she had never imagined. Her mind raced as she reviewed the stack of papers in front of her. They were contracts, ledgers, and documents detailing the inner workings of the Romano family business. She had only glanced at them briefly before, but now, as she focused on the fine print, she could see how important this task was. Each page held crucial information, secrets hidden in the details. She knew that if she missed something, it could mean the difference between success and disaster. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She was no longer just a maid. She was a part of this world now, a world that had always seemed so far beyond her reach. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. Just then, the door to the study opened, and Dominic walked in. His presence was commanding, and Naomi couldn't help but feel a little intimidated, despite the progress they had made. He stood by the door for a moment, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice smooth, yet there was an underlying tension to it. Naomi looked up from the papers and met his gaze. "I'm going through everything, but there's a lot to process," she replied, her voice steady. Dominic nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Take your time. I want everything to be perfect." Naomi nodded, but a small part of her felt a pang of doubt. Could she really do this? Could she really help him navigate this world of wealth, power, and secrets? Dominic stepped further into the room, his gaze shifting to the papers on the desk. He didn't sit, instead leaning against the edge of the desk, arms crossed as he observed her. For a moment, Naomi felt self-conscious, as though she were being scrutinized. But then, Dominic's voice broke through her thoughts. "You know," he began, "I've built this empire for years, but there's always been something I've missed. Something right in front of me that I couldn't see. I've trusted the wrong people, let the wrong things slide. But with you," he paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Naomi looked up at him, her curiosity piqued. "With me?" she asked softly. Dominic's eyes softened for just a moment before he spoke again. "I've learned that you don't build something like this alone. You need people who can see the truth, even when it's hidden. You need people who can spot what others miss." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She had never thought of herself as someone who could see the truth in such a grand, complicated world. But Dominic believed in her. And that belief, more than anything, made her want to succeed. "I'll do my best," Naomi said, her voice firm with determination. Dominic smiled, a rare expression of warmth crossing his face. "I know you will." He stood up straight, his posture returning to its usual commanding presence. "This is bigger than just the Romano family. It's about loyalty, trust, and protecting what matters. You're going to help me do that." Naomi felt a surge of responsibility wash over her. She wasn't just helping Dominic anymore. She was part of something that meant more than she had ever realized. For the first time, Naomi felt like she belonged. She wasn't just a maid or an outsider. She was a key part of a team. She was someone with the power to make a real difference. As the days passed, Naomi became more immersed in the business side of the Romano Empire. She pored over the documents, catching inconsistencies and spotting hidden clauses. With each passing day, her confidence grew. Dominic was patient with her, always offering guidance without pushing too hard. And as they worked together, something between them shifted. It wasn't just the business that was changing. Naomi could feel the dynamics between them evolving. There was an unspoken understanding now, a bond forged through respect and shared purpose. One evening, as they sat together in the study, Naomi looked up from the papers and met Dominic's gaze. "You know, I never thought I'd be here," she said quietly. Dominic raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" he asked. Naomi smiled slightly, her eyes reflecting the quiet confidence she had gained over the past few weeks. "I never imagined I'd be part of something like this. But now, I can see it. I can see how everything fits together." Dominic studied her for a moment, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I'm glad you see it," he said, his voice softer than usual. Naomi felt a warmth spread through her chest. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who mattered. She was someone who had found her place in a world she never thought she'd be part of. Naomi's life had shifted so dramatically over the past few weeks that at times, it felt almost unreal. What had once been a predictable routine of cleaning and serving had transformed into something far more complex and demanding. She had found herself navigating the intricate world of the Romano Empire, a world of contracts, business dealings, and subtle maneuvers that required more than just a keen eye. It was a world that Dominic had offered her a place in, a place where her intellect and attention to detail were valued. And with that offer came new responsibilities, new challenges. She was no longer just the maid. She was an integral part of the team, someone Dominic trusted. Naomi sat at the large desk in the study, reviewing another set of documents. This one was different. It was more personal, an agreement regarding the future of the Romano family estate. As she read through the terms, Naomi couldn't help but think about how far she had come. Just months ago, she was invisible in the mansion, a mere figure who cleaned the rooms and kept to herself. Now, she was making decisions, contributing in ways she never imagined possible. She took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the fine print on the page in front of her. The words were familiar, but the weight of the situation was not lost on her. These documents weren't just about money or assets. They were about the future of the Romano legacy. As she turned the page, she froze. There it was again, a subtle clause hidden within the agreement. It wasn't the same as the one she had found before, but it was equally dangerous. It was a loophole that could be exploited, and Naomi knew that if it went unnoticed, it could cause more damage than anyone realized. She quickly set the documents aside, her mind racing. She needed to speak with Dominic. But how would he react? It wasn't just about finding these things anymore. It was about what they meant and how they could change the course of everything. Naomi's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching the study. She looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his usual confident demeanor in place. But his eyes softened when they met hers. "What's going on, Naomi?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of curiosity. Naomi stood up, pushing the documents aside, and walked over to him. "I found something," she said quietly. Dominic raised an eyebrow, but he said nothing, allowing her to continue. Naomi hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "It's another clause in one of the agreements. It's hidden, just like the last one, but this one, it's different. If it's not caught, it could be used against us in ways we aren't prepared for." Dominic studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Naomi could feel the weight of his gaze, but she stood her ground. Finally, he nodded. "Show me," he said simply. Naomi led him to the desk, where the papers were laid out. She pointed to the clause, her finger tracing the words carefully. Dominic leaned in, his eyes scanning the text with a sharp focus. Naomi watched him, noticing the way his jaw tightened as he read. When he finished, he sat back, his gaze lifting to meet hers. "You're right," he said, his voice low. "This could be trouble." Naomi exhaled, relieved that he understood. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just finding the clause. There was a deeper connection now, something that made her feel like she was part of something larger than herself. Dominic looked at her, his eyes softening. "You're proving to me that I made the right choice in trusting you," he said. "I've had people around me for years, but none of them ever saw things the way you do. You're more than just a maid, Naomi." Naomi felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but she quickly pushed it aside. She wasn't here to bask in compliments. She was here to do a job, to prove that she could handle the responsibility he had given her. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady. Dominic stood up, his expression hardening as he walked toward the window. "Now, we make sure this doesn't become a problem. We need to find out who's behind this and what their endgame is. It's not just about the Romano family anymore. It's about everyone who depends on us." Naomi nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead. It wasn't just about her anymore, either. She was part of something that had the power to shape the future. Dominic turned back to face her, his gaze intense. "I need you to stay sharp, Naomi. This isn't over. It's just beginning." Naomi met his gaze, her resolve firming. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. She had found her place in this world, and she was ready to fight for it. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. Dominic's lips curved into a slight smile. "I know you will." The air between them shifted, a silent understanding passing between them. They were in this together now, and whatever challenges lay ahead, Naomi knew she wouldn't face them alone. Naomi's mind raced as she left the study. The weight of Dominic's words, the trust he had placed in her, was more than she could have ever expected. She had come a long way from the invisible maid she once was. But now, she wasn't just helping with the family business, she was in it. She had a stake in its future. With each passing day, Naomi's role in the Romano Empire expanded. She found herself poring over more documents, meeting with Dominic more frequently, and learning about the intricacies of the family's business. The stakes were higher now, and she knew that any mistake could cost them everything. Dominic had made it clear that she was a key player in this. He needed her sharp eye, her ability to spot the smallest details that others missed. And Naomi was determined not to let him down. One afternoon, as Naomi sat in the study, reviewing a contract for a new partnership, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his usual confident demeanor in place, but there was something different in his eyes. Something urgent. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, the intensity in his gaze unmistakable. Naomi stood up, her heart skipping a beat. "What's going on?" she asked, her mind already running through the possibilities. Dominic stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "There's been a development," he said, his tone serious. "A few of my associates have been acting strangely, and I'm starting to think there's a mole in the organization." Naomi's stomach dropped. A mole? That was a dangerous accusation. But she could see the determination in Dominic's eyes, and she knew he didn't make decisions like this lightly. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rush of anxiety she felt. Dominic walked over to the desk, running a hand through his hair. "I need you to keep an eye on everything. The next few days will be crucial. We can't afford any slip-ups." Naomi nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about loyalty, trust, and protecting everything they had worked for. "I won't let you down," Naomi said, her voice unwavering. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his eyes softening. "I know you won't," he replied, a hint of warmth in his voice. He turned toward the door, but then paused. "By the way, Naomi," he said, looking back at her, "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about how you've never been part of this world before. But you're not just part of it now, you're a part of me, and I'm grateful for that." Naomi felt a rush of warmth at his words. She had never expected this, never expected to be seen, to be valued the way she was now. But in that moment, she realized that Dominic wasn't just a mafia boss. He was someone who genuinely cared about the people who stood by him. And Naomi had earned her place beside him. As the days passed, Naomi worked tirelessly, keeping track of every detail, watching for any sign of betrayal. She knew that in a world like this, trust was fragile, and one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. But despite the tension, there was a growing sense of unity between her and Dominic. They were a team now, facing the world together. Naomi's confidence grew with each passing day. She felt a sense of purpose she had never known before, and she knew that, no matter what, she wasn't going to let this opportunity slip through her fingers. One evening, as she was reviewing a set of new contracts, Naomi heard a knock at the door. She looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his expression serious. "Naomi," he said, his voice low, "I need you to come with me. There's something you need to see." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. What could it be? She followed Dominic down the hallway and into a small, dimly lit room at the back of the mansion. The room was filled with maps, papers, and old books, and in the center of it all was a large table covered in files. Dominic walked over to the table and gestured for Naomi to join him. "I've been investigating this mole," he said quietly, "and I need your eyes on something. There's a pattern here that I can't make sense of, but I think you might be able to." Naomi stepped forward, her mind sharp and focused. As she scanned the documents on the table, she immediately saw the connections Dominic had missed. The pattern was clear now. She pointed to a series of names and dates. "These are the key players," she said. "But the real connection is in the timing. Someone is manipulating these events, trying to undermine you at the perfect moment." Dominic's eyes narrowed as he followed her finger. "So you're saying this is more than just a mole?" Naomi nodded. "I think someone's been planning this for a while, and I think they're getting close to making their move." Dominic took a deep breath, his gaze turning cold. "Then we'll make sure they never get the chance." Naomi looked at him, knowing that the path ahead would be even more dangerous than before. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to fight for everything they had built. And she knew that Dominic was right there beside her, every step of the way. Naomi's mind raced as she left the study. The weight of Dominic's words, the trust he had placed in her, was more than she could have ever expected. She had come a long way from the invisible maid she once was. But now, she wasn't just helping with the family business, she was in it. She had a stake in its future. With each passing day, Naomi's role in the Romano Empire expanded. She found herself poring over more documents, meeting with Dominic more frequently, and learning about the intricacies of the family's business. The stakes were higher now, and she knew that any mistake could cost them everything. Dominic had made it clear that she was a key player in this. He needed her sharp eye, her ability to spot the smallest details that others missed. And Naomi was determined not to let him down. One afternoon, as Naomi sat in the study, reviewing a contract for a new partnership, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his usual confident demeanor in place, but there was something different in his eyes. Something urgent. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, the intensity in his gaze unmistakable. Naomi stood up, her heart skipping a beat. "What's going on?" she asked, her mind already running through the possibilities. Dominic stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "There's been a development," he said, his tone serious. "A few of my associates have been acting strangely, and I'm starting to think there's a mole in the organization." Naomi's stomach dropped. A mole? That was a dangerous accusation. But she could see the determination in Dominic's eyes, and she knew he didn't make decisions like this lightly. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rush of anxiety she felt. Dominic walked over to the desk, running a hand through his. "Hair, I need you to keep an eye on everything. The next few days will be crucial. We can't afford any slip-ups." Naomi nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about loyalty, trust, and protecting everything they had worked for. "I won't let you down," Naomi said, her voice unwavering. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his eyes softening. "I know you won't," he replied, a hint of warmth in his voice. He turned toward the door, but then paused. "By the way, Naomi," he said, looking back at her, "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about how you've never been part of this world before. But you're not just part of it now, you're a part of me. And I'm grateful for that." Naomi felt a rush of warmth at his words. She had never expected this, never expected to be seen, to be valued the way she was now. But in that moment, she realized that Dominic wasn't just a mafia boss. He was someone who genuinely cared about the people who stood by him. And Naomi had earned her place beside him. As the days passed, Naomi worked tirelessly, keeping track of every detail, watching for any sign of betrayal. She knew that in a world like this, trust was fragile, and one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. But despite the tension, there was a growing sense of unity between her and Dominic. They were a team now, facing the world together. Naomi's confidence grew with each passing day. She felt a sense of purpose she had never known before, and she knew that, no matter what, she wasn't going to let this opportunity slip through her fingers. One evening, as she was reviewing a set of new contracts, Naomi heard a knock at the door. She looked up to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his expression serious. "Naomi," he said, his voice low, "I need you to come with me. There's something you need to see." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. What could it be? She followed Dominic down the hallway and into a small, dimly lit room at the back of the mansion. The room was filled with maps, papers, and old books, and in the center of it all was a large table covered in files. Dominic walked over to the table and gestured for Naomi to join him. "I've been investigating this mole," he said quietly, "and I need your eyes on something. There's a pattern here that I can't make sense of, but I think you might be able to." Naomi stepped forward, her mind sharp and focused. As she scanned the documents on the table, she immediately saw the connections Dominic had missed. The pattern was clear now. She pointed to a series of names and dates. "These are the key players," she said. "But the real connection is in the timing. Someone is manipulating these events, trying to undermine you at the perfect moment." Dominic's eyes narrowed as he followed her finger. "So you're saying this is more than just a mole?" Naomi nodded. "I think someone's been planning this for a while, and I think they're getting close to making their move." Dominic took a deep breath, his gaze turning cold. "Then we'll make sure they never get the chance." Naomi looked at him, knowing that the path ahead would be even more dangerous than before. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to fight for everything they had built. And she knew that Dominic was right there beside her, every step of the way. Naomi had never expected the events of the past few weeks to unfold in the way they had. What began as an ordinary job in the Castellano mansion had transformed into something far beyond her comprehension. Now, not only was she a key figure in the Romano family business, but she also had the responsibility of safeguarding the empire Dominic had built. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on her as she walked through the mansion's halls. Each room now filled with new meaning, every corner a reminder of what was at stake. She had always been good at observing, at catching the little details that others overlooked, but now those skills were being tested in ways she never could have imagined. As Naomi made her way to the study, where she knew Dominic would be waiting, she felt the weight of the moment press against her chest. She had learned so much about the inner workings of the Romano family: contracts, deals, alliances, and enemies. She had seen what power could do to people, how quickly it could corrupt, how easily loyalty could be betrayed. But in Dominic's presence, she still felt something else, a quiet determination to do right, to protect what mattered. She pushed open the door to the study, where Dominic was already standing by the window, his back turned to her. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the room, making the space feel almost surreal. "Naomi," he said without turning around, his voice low and steady. "I need you to take a look at something." Naomi walked over to him, her eyes drawn to the papers spread out on the desk. They were contracts, documents outlining potential alliances with other families, agreements that could change the direction of the Romano Empire. She could feel the tension in the room, the weight of Dominic's gaze as he watched her approach. "What do you see?" he asked, his tone both curious and commanding. Naomi sat down at the desk, her eyes scanning the documents with a practiced eye. She had become accustomed to seeing the world through the lens of contracts and legal jargon, and in that moment, she could feel her confidence growing. As her gaze moved from one paper to the next, she spotted something that made her pause. It was subtle, a clause hidden within the language, something that could easily be overlooked if you weren't paying attention. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a deliberate loophole, a trap waiting to be sprung. Naomi's heart raced as she traced the words with her finger. This was the kind of thing she had been looking for. This could destroy everything. "This clause," Naomi began, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline flooding her veins. "It's a trap." Dominic's eyes flicked to her, his expression unreadable. He walked over to her side of the desk and leaned in, his gaze scanning the paper as Naomi pointed to the problematic clause. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Naomi swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, to having Dominic's full attention. It's a legal trap. If you sign this, you're giving away everything. It's not just a bad deal. It's a weapon, and the other party holds all the power." Dominic was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving the paper. Naomi could see the wheels turning in his mind, processing what she had just revealed. Finally, he exhaled sharply, a hint of frustration in his expression. "I missed it," he muttered under his breath. Naomi looked up at him, her heart still pounding. "It's not just you," she said quietly. "This kind of thing can slip past anyone. But if you don't catch it, it could ruin everything." Dominic's gaze softened for a moment, and Naomi saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected: genuine gratitude. "You're right," he said, his voice low. "This could have been the end of everything." He paused, as if considering something, then met Naomi's eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Naomi felt a rush of warmth flood through her chest, but she quickly pushed it aside. This wasn't about her. It was about keeping the Romano Empire intact, about protecting everything Dominic had worked for. But in that moment, she realized something else, that she was no longer just an outsider, no longer just the maid. She was part of this, a crucial part of something far bigger than herself. Dominic stood up and walked over to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out over the estate. "I need you to keep an eye on everything," he said, his voice firm. "We can't afford to make another mistake." Naomi nodded, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just protecting the Romano family anymore. She was protecting everything, everything Dominic had built, everything that was at stake. As she looked at him, she realized that she wasn't just a part of this world now. She was essential to it, and she wasn't going to let him down. "I'll do whatever it takes," Naomi said, her voice steady. Dominic turned to look at her, his eyes intense. "I know you will," he replied, his voice filled with resolve. Naomi stood there for a moment longer, her heart still racing. She had made her choice. She had stepped into a world of power and danger, but now she understood something more. She was no longer just an observer. She was a player, and she was ready to take on whatever came next. Naomi had spent the next few days in a whirlwind of activity, her mind constantly occupied with the weight of her new responsibilities. The Romano family business was far more complicated than she had ever imagined, and every day seemed to bring new challenges. The documents were endless, the meetings frequent, and the pressure to stay ahead of any potential threats was unrelenting. But despite the overwhelming nature of it all, Naomi felt a growing sense of purpose. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a trusted ally, someone Dominic relied on. The thought of that made her feel both proud and terrified in equal measure. As the days passed, Naomi found herself working more closely with Dominic. They spent hours going over documents together, analyzing contracts, discussing potential partnerships, and dealing with everything from financial strategy to family politics. Dominic never let up, his focus sharp, his drive unmatched. But Naomi noticed something else. Behind his cold, calculating exterior, there were moments, small moments, when she saw the man behind the boss. His frustration, his moments of doubt, and, on rare occasions, a flicker of something softer in his eyes. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Naomi sat at the large desk in the study, reviewing the latest batch of contracts. She could hear the distant hum of conversation from the staff in the halls, but the mansion felt eerily quiet. Just as she was about to turn the page, the door to the study opened, and Dominic stepped in. His face was drawn, his usual composure slipping for a moment as he looked at her. "Naomi," he said, his voice tight. "We have a problem." Naomi looked up from the papers, her heart rate quickening. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to mask the concern in her voice. Dominic closed the door behind him, his expression serious. "There's been a breach. A leak." Naomi's stomach sank. A leak? That was one of the last things they could afford. If anyone got hold of sensitive information, everything could unravel. "How bad?" she asked, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety forming in her chest. "We don't know yet," Dominic replied, running a hand through his hair. "But I need you to track everything. We can't afford any more mistakes." Naomi nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. She had become accustomed to finding the small details others missed, but this was different. This was dangerous. "I'll get started right away," she said, pushing the documents aside and grabbing her tablet. Dominic lingered for a moment, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Thank you, Naomi," he said, his voice quieter now. "You've done more for this family than I can ever repay." Naomi didn't know how to respond. She had always been someone who kept her head down, who avoided the spotlight. But now, Dominic was looking at her like she mattered, like she was essential to what they were trying to protect. "I'm just doing my job," she said, trying to brush off the compliment. Dominic nodded, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I know, but you've earned my trust." The words hit her like a wave. Naomi had spent so many years trying to remain invisible, trying to stay out of trouble. But now, for the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly seen. Dominic turned and walked toward the door, but paused just before leaving. "I need you to be careful," he said, his voice low. "I don't trust anyone right now." Naomi looked up at him, her heart pounding. "I will," she replied. With that, he left the room, leaving Naomi alone with her thoughts. She stared at the screen in front of her, but her mind kept drifting back to Dominic's words. He trusted her. He had never trusted anyone before, at least not in the way he trusted her. She had earned his respect, and that was something she never expected. But now, with the stakes higher than ever, Naomi knew she had to be more than just a trusted ally. She had to be the one to find the leak, to protect everything they had worked for. As she worked through the night, analyzing every document, checking every email trail, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just the leak she had to worry about. There were bigger forces at play now, forces that had been lying in wait, ready to strike. Dominic had always been one step ahead, but Naomi knew they couldn't let their guard down. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, Naomi had a breakthrough. She found something. A hidden file buried in an encrypted server, a file that no one had accessed in years. She quickly traced it back to a high-ranking member of the Romano family who had been in contact with a rival group. Naomi's heart raced as she realized what this meant. The leak wasn't external. It was coming from within. She immediately made her way to Dominic's office, her mind already working through the implications of what she had uncovered. As she entered the office, she found Dominic sitting at his desk, his face drawn with the same tension she had seen the night before. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady. Dominic looked up, his eyes sharp. "What did you find?" Naomi walked over to the desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed him the tablet. "It's someone inside," she said, her voice low. "Someone close to you." Dominic took the tablet, his expression unreadable as he scanned the information. His jaw tightened as he read, and for a moment, Naomi thought he might explode. But he didn't. He simply set the tablet down and looked up at her. "Good work," he said quietly. "Now we deal with this." Naomi nodded, her heart racing. She had uncovered the truth, but the truth was just the beginning. She didn't know where this would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. She was in this for the long haul, no matter what. Dominic's empire, his family, was in her hands now, and she wasn't going to let anyone tear it down. Not now. Not ever. Naomi sat quietly in the study, her fingers drumming softly against the polished wood of the desk. The weight of what she had uncovered the night before was still pressing heavily on her chest. A leak. A traitor within the Romano family. Someone close to Dominic. She had never imagined it would come to this, but as she watched Dominic pace across the room, his brow furrowed in deep concentration, she knew this was just the beginning. The revelation had shaken them both, but it also marked a turning point. The empire Dominic had built was on the verge of collapse, and Naomi understood the gravity of the situation more than ever. This wasn't just a business problem, it was personal. Everything Dominic had worked for, everything he had sacrificed, was now under threat. Naomi had earned his trust, but now, she had to prove she was worthy of it. She had to do more than just find the leak. She had to protect Dominic. She had to protect everything. As Dominic stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression unreadable, Naomi stood up, her body tense with anticipation. "We can't let this slide," Dominic said, his voice cold, his tone filled with a quiet fury. "We need to find out who's behind this, and we need to do it fast." Naomi nodded, her mind already running through the possible scenarios. She had to think like the enemy. She had to understand what they were after and how they planned to strike. Every detail mattered now. "I'll work with you," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes piercing through her as if searching for something. "I know you will," he replied, his voice low. There was something in his eyes, something Naomi hadn't seen before, appreciation. It was a small shift, but it made her heart race. She had spent so long trying to remain invisible, but now, for the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing beside him. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was his ally, his equal, and for some reason, that realization made her feel stronger than she had ever felt before. "We'll start with the people closest to us," Dominic continued, his tone growing more determined. "We can't trust anyone right now, not even those we've known for years. We'll need to be careful who we bring in on this. We don't know who's loyal and who's not." Naomi nodded again, her mind already working through the logistics. "I'll start looking through the records," she said. "We need to find any connection, any sign of wrongdoing." Dominic walked over to the desk, his eyes still sharp, calculating. "Good. Let's get to work. I'll handle the family, you handle the business. We'll cover all angles." Naomi turned to walk to the large bookshelf that lined one wall of the study. She had spent hours poring over documents just like this, but now, it felt different. Now, every piece of information she uncovered would make a difference. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was playing a part in something much bigger. The next few days were a blur of activity. Naomi worked tirelessly, analyzing contracts, tracking financial transactions, and combing through every document she could find. She knew this would take time, but she also knew that they couldn't afford to wait. Every moment mattered. As she sat in the study, reading through another pile of records, she felt the weight of the situation pressing in on her. She was no longer just a passive observer, waiting for instructions. She was an active participant, making decisions, uncovering truths, and most importantly, protecting the family. Dominic had made it clear that this wasn't just about business. It was about loyalty, about trust. And Naomi knew that the stakes were higher than they had ever been. There was a growing sense of urgency in the air. She had to stay focused. She had to stay sharp. As the days wore on, Naomi's confidence grew. She began to see patterns where others had missed them, connecting the dots between various people, events, and transactions. And then, one evening, as she was going through a set of financial reports, she found something. It wasn't much, just a small detail hidden in the margins of an invoice, but it was enough to make her heart race. A name she recognized. It was someone Dominic had trusted, someone who had been with the family for years. Naomi's mind raced as she thought back to the conversations she had overheard, the small details she had noticed. It all clicked into place. This person was the leak. The traitor. She stood up quickly, the papers shaking in her hands. She needed to tell Dominic, but she also knew this wasn't something she could do alone. She needed to be careful. She needed to be strategic. Naomi walked quickly through the halls of the mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt this kind of pressure before. This was different. This was real. She pushed open the door to Dominic's office and found him standing by the window, his back to her. For a moment, she hesitated. She had never seen him like this, so vulnerable, so deep in thought. But then he turned to face her, and she saw it in his eyes, determination. He was ready for whatever came next. I found something, Naomi said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. Dominic's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening as he stepped toward her. What did you find? Naomi handed him the papers, her fingers trembling slightly. It's him, she said. He's the one leaking information. I know it. Dominic took the papers and studied them in silence. Naomi watched him, her breath held tight in her chest. Finally, he looked up at her, his gaze cold and calculating. Then we take him down, he said. We end this before it destroys everything. Naomi nodded, her heart racing. She had just crossed a line, and there was no going back now. She was in this for good. Together, they would stop the traitor. Together, they would protect everything they had built. Naomi stood there, her hands trembling slightly as she watched Dominic scan the papers. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her chest. They had found the traitor, the person who had been betraying them from within, someone Dominic had trusted implicitly. The thought of it made her feel sick to her stomach. She had never imagined that someone so close to Dominic, someone who had been part of the family for years, could do this. But now that they knew, the question was what to do next. Dominic's expression was cold and calculating as he read through the documents, his mind clearly working through the next steps. Naomi stood quietly by his side, waiting for him to speak. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes were filled with resolve. We don't have time to waste, he said, his voice steady. We take action immediately. We can't let this go any further. Naomi nodded, understanding the urgency in his tone. Every moment they hesitated was another moment the traitor could act, another opportunity for them to lose everything. What's the plan? She asked, her voice calm but filled with a sense of purpose. Dominic didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the window, his back turned to her as he stared out at the sprawling estate. The golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, but Naomi could tell that his thoughts were far from the peaceful scene outside. We need to get ahead of this, he said finally, his voice low. We need to confront him before he can do any more damage. But we have to be careful. We can't let him know that we know. Naomi's heart raced at the mention of confrontation. She wasn't used to this kind of danger, to dealing with people who could destroy everything with a single move. But she also knew that Dominic was right. They couldn't afford to wait. What do you need me to do? She asked, ready to step into whatever role was necessary. Dominic turned to face her, his gaze sharp. I need you to keep an eye on the rest of the family, Naomi. I need to know who's involved and who's still loyal. You're the only one I can trust to handle this. Naomi felt a surge of pride at his words, but also a weight of responsibility she hadn't felt before. She was no longer just the maid, no longer just a bystander in this game of power. She was part of it now, and the stakes were higher than ever. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, her voice unwavering. Dominic's eyes softened for a moment, a flicker of something more than just business flashing in his gaze. I know you will, he said, his voice quiet. Naomi's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly pushed aside the emotions threatening to rise to the surface. This wasn't the time for distractions. They had a job to do. As the evening wore on, Naomi began her task, carefully observing the other members of the Romano family. She knew that trust was a fragile thing, especially in a world built on power and secrets. She moved quietly through the mansion, her every step deliberate as she watched, listened, and learned. In the days that followed, Naomi uncovered more than she had expected. She found signs of loyalty where she had least expected it, and she also found more whispers of betrayal among people she had once thought of as allies. Each revelation left her feeling more isolated, but also more determined. Dominic was right. They couldn't trust anyone, not even those closest to them. But as Naomi worked tirelessly to gather information, she found herself growing closer to Dominic in a way she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about something deeper, something that bound them together in a way that went beyond loyalty or trust. It was a shared purpose, a shared desire to protect everything they had worked for. One night, as Naomi sat at her desk, reviewing the latest set of documents, she heard a soft knock on the door. She looked up to see Dominic standing there, his expression unreadable but his eyes searching hers. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. Naomi stood up, her heart beating faster at the seriousness in his tone. She followed him down the hall, her mind racing with possibilities. What could this be about? Was it more about the traitor? Or something else? They arrived at a small, private room in the back of the mansion, one that Naomi had never seen before. The door closed behind them, and Dominic turned to face her, his gaze intense. "We're going to confront him," he said, his voice low. "But we can't do it alone." Naomi's stomach twisted with anxiety. Confrontation was never easy, especially not when it involved someone who had been trusted for so long. But she knew this was the only way forward. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady. Dominic paused for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "I need you to be ready. This is going to change everything," he said. "But you're not alone in this, Naomi. You never will be." Naomi felt a surge of gratitude at his words, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of dread. They were about to take the final step, to confront the traitor head-on. It was a dangerous game, and they would need all their strength and wits to survive. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew one thing. She was ready. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was Dominic's ally, and she would fight to protect what they had built, no matter the cost. The tension in the air was palpable as Naomi and Dominic stood in the small room, the door closed behind them. It was time. The plan had been set, the path forward clear, but Naomi felt the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. This was no longer just about a traitor in their midst. This was about everything they had built, everything they had fought for. Dominic's eyes were sharp, his jaw set with determination as he glanced at the documents on the table before them. Naomi could feel her heart racing, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had never been in a situation like this before, but now, she was fully immersed in this world, this dangerous, high-stakes world where every move mattered, and every choice could mean the difference between success and ruin. Dominic turned to her, his gaze unwavering. "We confront him tonight," he said, his voice steady. Naomi nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let fear control her. Dominic's plan was risky, but it was the only way forward. They had to act swiftly, decisively. She could see the gears turning in his mind as he spoke. "We'll gather the key people," he continued. "The ones we trust. We can't afford any surprises. This has to be done carefully, methodically. If we give him a chance to slip away, we lose everything." Naomi took a deep breath, her mind focused on the task ahead. She had always been someone who paid attention to the smallest details, and that skill was what had brought her to this point. This moment. She wasn't going to let it slip away. "I'll be ready," she said, her voice firm. Dominic gave her a small nod, his eyes softening just slightly, but the intensity of the situation was still there. He wasn't used to showing vulnerability, but Naomi had seen it in him before. A fleeting moment, a crack in the armor. It was those moments, those glimpses of the man beneath the boss, that had changed everything. She wasn't just his ally anymore. She was something more. Someone he relied on. Someone he trusted. And that trust meant everything to her. As the hours passed, Naomi moved through the mansion, gathering information, observing, waiting. Her mind never stopped working, running through every possibility, every angle. She had to be prepared for anything. The clock was ticking. When the time came, They would be ready. Finally, the evening arrived. The mansion was quiet, the only sounds the soft rustle of papers and the faint hum of conversation in distant rooms. Naomi stood at the doorway of the study, her hand resting lightly on the frame. Dominic was already there, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He turned to her as she stepped inside, his gaze meeting hers with that familiar intensity. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. Naomi nodded, her nerves steady. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice unwavering. Dominic gave a small nod, his eyes dark with determination. "Let's end this," he said, and Naomi felt the weight of his words settle deep within her chest. They were about to do something dangerous, something that could change everything. But there was no turning back now. She followed Dominic as they walked down the long hallway, each step echoing in the quiet mansion. The tension between them was thick, but Naomi could feel something else beneath it, a connection, a bond forged through the trials they had faced together. They reached the private study, the door closed behind them, and Dominic turned to face her. "This is it," he said, his voice tight. Naomi could feel the stakes rising, the pressure mounting. This was no longer just a business decision. This was personal. Everything had led to this moment, and she was determined to see it through. "We'll confront him here," Dominic continued, his voice steady. "When he walks in, we'll have the upper hand." Naomi's heart raced as she nodded. She had been part of this plan, but the reality of it was finally setting in. This wasn't just about stopping a traitor. This was about protecting everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed. The door opened, and Naomi's breath caught in her throat. It was him, the one they had been watching, the one who had betrayed them. His face was unreadable, his expression guarded, but Naomi could see the tension in his posture, the way his eyes flickered around the room, looking for any sign of danger. He had no idea what was about to happen. Dominic stepped forward, his presence commanding. "You've been found out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The traitor froze, his eyes narrowing as he processed the words. Naomi watched him carefully, her heart beating faster as she waited for his reaction. There was no going back now. The confrontation had begun. The traitor's expression flickered, and Naomi could see the fear creeping into his eyes. He knew it was over. There was no escape. Dominic took a step closer, his voice cold and final. "You betrayed us, and now you will pay the price." Naomi felt a pang of something she couldn't quite place, sympathy, perhaps, or regret. But there was no time for that. They had come too far, and there was no turning back. The traitor took a deep breath, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. But there was no escape. There was only justice. "You're done," Dominic said, his voice unwavering. "Get out." Naomi watched as the traitor left, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Dominic turned to Naomi, his eyes softening just slightly. "It's over," he said, his voice quiet. Naomi nodded, her heart still racing. They had done it. They had faced the enemy head-on and won. But as the silence stretched between them, Naomi knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But for now, they had won. And that was enough. The mansion felt different the next day. The tension from the previous night had yet to dissipate, but there was a new sense of clarity in the air. Naomi stood at the window of the study, gazing out over the vast estate, her mind still processing the events that had unfolded. They had confronted the traitor, exposed the betrayal, and taken control of the situation, but it had come at a cost. The world Dominic had built, the empire that seemed so impenetrable, was now vulnerable. And Naomi knew that this was only the beginning. Dominic had always been the calm center of their world, but even he had shown a crack in his armor last night. Naomi had seen it, the fleeting moment when the anger and betrayal had washed over him, and she understood that this wasn't just a business deal for him. This was personal. As the hours passed, Naomi continued her work, carefully analyzing every document, every piece of information they had gathered. There was no room for mistakes now. She couldn't afford to miss anything. But even as she worked, her mind kept drifting back to Dominic. She had always known him as the Mafia boss, the man with power and control, but now, she was beginning to see him in a new light. He wasn't just the leader of a criminal empire. He was a man who had worked hard to protect his family, to build something that would last. And now, That empire was at risk. Naomi had seen the depths of his trust in her, the unspoken bond that had formed between them. But she also knew that trust could be fragile. Everything depended on the next move, on how they handled the fallout from the traitor's actions. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. She turned to see Dominic standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. "Naomi," he said, his voice steady. "We need to talk." Naomi stood up, her heart racing. The urgency in his tone told her that something was about to change. She followed him down the long hallway, her mind already racing with possibilities. What could this be about? They stopped at a small, private room, and Dominic turned to face her. His eyes were dark with determination, but there was something else in them too, a hint of vulnerability. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about everything that's happened." Naomi nodded, waiting for him to continue. "This isn't just about the business anymore," he said, his voice low. "It's about everything we've built. Everything I've built." Naomi felt a pang in her chest at his words. She had always seen him as the boss, the one in control, but now she saw something more. She saw a man who had invested everything in this empire, a man who was willing to risk it all to protect it. "I know," Naomi said softly. "We've come this far, and we can't stop now." Dominic stepped closer, his presence commanding. "I need you to make a decision," he said. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. A decision? What did he mean? "What kind of decision?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "I need to know if you're with me, Naomi," he said, his voice steady but filled with an intensity that made her pulse race. "This isn't just about protecting the Romano family anymore. This is about our future, about the choices we make from here on out." Naomi felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had always been part of the family, in a way, but now, it felt different. It was more than just loyalty. It was about commitment, about standing together through whatever came next. She looked at him, her mind racing, and then she nodded. "I'm with you," she said, her voice firm. Dominic's expression softened, and for a brief moment, Naomi saw something in his eyes, something that went beyond the power and control. It was gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Naomi could see the determination in his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. They had come this far, and they were stronger together. The road ahead would be difficult, but Naomi was no longer just an observer in this world. She was an active participant, and with Dominic by her side, she knew they would face whatever came next. As they stood in silence, the weight of the future pressing down on them, Naomi realized that this was just the beginning. The path they had chosen would lead them through even darker challenges, but they would face them head-on, together. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was part of the Romano family, and that bond would be tested in ways she couldn't yet understand. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going anywhere. They had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came next.